Great. Okay, so welcome everybody to the latest installment of our DBIO online series. My name is Nancy Ford. I'm a professor of physics at Simon Fraser University, and I'm the chair of the engagement committee of DBIO. And just before I turn things over to Armita, I thought I'd give you an overview of our events in case you are unaware of what we do and interested in learning more. So let me just share the screen here to show you. If you go to the DBIO homepage at the APS website, you'll see this. You could just Google APS DBIO to get there. And then if you click workshops and networking, it takes you to a list of the events that we have organized and are planning to organize. So there will be more coming in the coming months as well. For example, next month we have something that is probably not as relevant to most of the people here, which is preparing for the academic job market. Other events that have happened in the past, if there's any of them that you are interested in, you can click on them and find a recording of the event. So we record all of these so that people unable to attend can still participate. So encourage you to stay tuned to this page for future events. And if you have suggestions of things that the engagement committee could do, reach out to us. Armita is our vice chair of the committee. So she'd be happy to take suggestions, I'm sure. So with that, welcome everyone. I hope this is a really awesome opportunity to discuss new faculty life. And I will turn this over to Armita, who's chairing this.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nancy. Welcome everyone. And first, thanks to our panelists who agreed to be here. So let me give a very brief introduction of who they are, if you don't know who they are, and then we'll go over a few questions that I've sort of gathered from what I've heard other people ask about this topic, and then we open the stage for audience questions. So we're going to cut it at 1 hour because I don't think it's more productive to just stay longer. But yeah, so let's see if we can stick to that time. So our first panelist is Professor Andrea Liu. So Andrea is Hepburn Professor of Physics at UPenn. She's a theoretical physicist working on biological physics and condensed matter. She had done fascinating work in disordered system, in glasses, in soft matter, and many sort of awards and recognition by the community over years. The other panelist is Thierry Emonet. Thierry is a professor of molecular, cellular, and developmental biology with an appointment at the Department of Physics as well at Yale University. So Thierry started as a theoretical astrophysicist and then switched to biology at some point during his career, started basically a biological physics lab in the MCD department. So Thierry is interested in sensing in biological systems, adaptation, and have looked at a broad range of systems from bacteria to olfaction to immune systems. So a lot of fascinating work, both experimentally and theoretically. And the third panelist and last today, because as I mentioned, Orit Pelek can't join us, is Evelyn Tang. Evelyn is assistant professor of physics at Rice University. So she started in theoretical physics and switched to biological themes as a postdoc. Evelyn has worked on emergent phenomena in systems out of equilibrium in the context of biological physics in active matter. So a lot of interesting work in sort of brain, in locomotion, and I think still quite a bit of work in quantum matter as real physical systems. Yeah, and my name is Armita Noor Mohammed. I'm an associate professor of physics at the University of Washington, and I'll be your panelist for the rest of this session. So I wanted to start a discussion about this theme of being early career sort of faculty in biological physics and generally in interdisciplinary fields by acknowledging the fact that our panelists come from very diverse backgrounds. They had their own journey to get to biological physics, and they're also in different departments. So one thing that, as we all look for jobs, we may have applied to different types of departments and we landed in different departments. So one question that I've heard a lot, and I had it as well. So if you're a physicist in a non-physics department, so like theory, how would you navigate the culture in that department? How would you fit in? How do you grow scientifically, I guess, in that department? And then if you're a physicist in a physics department doing biological physics, but happen to be in like a very conventional physics department, how do you convince your colleagues that what you're doing is real physics and it's interesting? And so familiarize your colleagues or build a culture around what you're doing. So I guess we'll start with Thierry, who's obvious victim here as a physicist in a non-physics department, but yeah, just continue after that.
Okay, hello everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. So the question is, how do you navigate as a physicist in a biology department? So maybe I'll give you first a very short background. So, I did a PhD in theoretical astrophysics. I was studying magnetic flux tubes in the sun, like how do you generate magnetic field in the sun. And then I was at the University of Chicago as a postdoc. And I really started to get interested in biology there. And there was a new assistant professor there, Philippe Cluzel, who was opening his lab. And so I joined his lab. And then after 5 years, I was looking for jobs. And so I applied everywhere, but I applied mostly to biology department because during those 5 years, what I learned is that an essential thing is to ask questions that are relevant to the biologists. And that's very difficult to do because you need to know a lot of biology to ask key questions. And so I thought that as a physicist, if I were surrounded by biologists, then I would have many people who can actually teach me biology, what's important, what's not so important, etc. So when I arrived here, that's what I did. I requested to be located next to Christine Jacobs Wagner, who was an assistant professor at the time. But I've read her paper and I thought they were really cool. So I ended up next to her, and then immediately we started to collaborate. And then after maybe a year, I started to collaborate with my neighbor above, like the floor right above, which was John Carlson, who is an olfactory. Christine is a microbiologist, and John Carlson is a neuroscientist working on olfaction. And immediately, I could do stuff in my lab that they would never have done by themselves, and ask questions that were relevant, but in a different manner. And so that's how basically I've been navigating, being in a biology department, and that has continued. Then I went to a retreat one day, and there was this guy presenting all this data on this developmental system in zebrafish. And before you know, 3 years or 4 years later, we've published like 3 or 4 papers together and had made models of development of the tail bud in zebrafish, and so on and so on. And then at some point, just doing theory was not enough, because now I also wanted to do my stuff. But at that point, I had learned a lot of biology. And so I wanted to have my own wet lab. And being in an environment, surrounded by wet lab, the barrier to get a wet lab is much lower, because everybody will help you, they'll advise you what to buy, what not to buy, what to do, what not to do, etc. No? So you have all that expertise around you. And so that's how I ended up having now a wet lab for many years.
All right, thanks. Andrea, if you want to add something. And
yeah, so well, I started out in physics,
yeah,
and I'm in physics now, but I wasn't always. So I actually went from assistant professor to full in the UCLA Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, never having ever had a chemistry course in my life. So, and before that, I had been actually a postdoc in chemical engineering. So I have actually wandered around a bit disciplinarily myself. And so yes, when I started in the UCLA chemistry department, I had not been a graduate student or a postdoc at all ever in a chemistry department. So I was completely unknown to the chemistry community, and sort of had to, establish myself. So a really important thing was really to go to, all the seminars, talk to all the people who are coming to speak in the seminars, talk to my colleagues, listen a lot, just to find out how did people in chemistry choose problems? What were they thinking about? What did they find was interesting? And then try to find something that was interesting to me, but also interesting to them. And okay, so the nice thing is that not all departments are as insistent on preserving the rigor, or not the rigor, but just the purity of the profession as physics. I mean, physics is just so narrow-minded. Is that really physics? They're always asking this, really obsessed by maintaining the purity of physics. But not all departments are like that. And so you can take advantage of that. So in my department, I did end up working, I first started working on charged polymers, got into biophysics that way, through multivalent ion mediated attractions and stuff. But I also worked on weird things like foam rheology and jamming that were really quite strange for a chemistry department. But you don't always have to just completely conform to the expectations, as long as you have enough. So I got tenure based on the charged polymers, and moving more towards biological physical chemistry. But once I had tenure, I could sort of do what I wanted, and I really did take advantage of that. And I was able to convince them that it was interesting. So, with enough persuasion, I think your colleagues can be okay.
Evelyn, I think you have moved around in different types of departments as well, and maybe your insight on this, if you want to add something.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think this reminds me of how I met Armita. We were in Göttingen together as group leaders, and honestly, I think this is something that Armita, I'd love to hear what you think about this as well. That in Europe, somehow it felt as if the boundaries were not as picky, or not as judgy of who's in physics, who's not. And what was also really fun when we were in Göttingen was that there were a lot of young group leaders, a lot of energy, a lot of women, and also men. But somehow there felt like a very good community of people who were supporting each other. And this really showed me, I think, what good community could be like. And I think it motivates me to look for that, to find that, because I absolutely agree that in an interdisciplinary field, we really have to build community and build each other up, because there isn't that sort of very natural or established community that you find in some, bigger or more traditional fields. And right now I'm at Rice, and so I just started here as an assistant professor. It's been almost 2 years now. And one thing that I also really like about the center is that we do have an NSF Center for Theoretical Biological Physics. So I think we're very fortunate that in here, there has been a very intentional bringing together of this field of biology and physics in a way that, in other places, it may not be as intentional, the way that things are put together. So I'm very lucky that I have mentors who have thought very much about this issue, about how to create this space for biological physics, but I definitely agree that there's still a lot of challenges. Explaining yourself I'm in a physics department, and explaining myself to my colleagues, that definitely takes a lot of work. And I think this is one thing that I see, one of the challenges I see in this interdisciplinary field is how hard we have to work to just, translate what we do, cross boundaries. So for me, I think because of a lot of techniques I use, I still seem quite tied. I use topology. I use a lot of methods from StatMech, and so that still is often couched in the language of physics. So it is quite recognizable to my colleagues, but at the same time, I still have to really motivate it, as Terry was saying. Once we start thinking about biological questions, motivating those questions takes a lot of work, and sometimes I find that I have to make it really broad. So questions like, okay, well, what is energy budget, what is entropy production, so that trying to couch it in a similar framework, or to step out to say what is a more fundamental framework that can be appealing to scientists in general, physicists in general. How do we develop models for non-equilibrium systems? And so really to think about couching it in that language is something that I have to do to connect with my colleagues. But I think that more and more they are recognizing that this is a growing field. I was so excited when, and I know that this is also due to a lot of hard work of people, in DBIO and around, to making physics of living systems as listed in the grad school rankings, which I think is really starting to say that this is one of the big upcoming, disciplines that students are looking at, and that they want to look at this subfield, that is ranked just as condensed matter and high energy and all these other subfields as well. So I think that starts to put us more and more in an even playing field with the more traditional fields of physics. And it's really gratifying to see that, we can become part of the conversation as well.
So I heard a lot. I mean, I heard from the three of you, and sort of word of convincing your colleagues, as that the work you're doing fits in whatever culture of that department you're at that time. So I guess the obvious question is, how do you go about convince people, right? It's especially in more rigid departments that people may have opinions of what physics is, for example, right? Andrea, maybe you wanna.
Yeah, you really had to talk to them a lot. This cannot be done by just holding up in your office. I mean, you really have to seek out your colleagues and talk to them, many of them, even those outside your immediate area. So I was in physical chemistry, but I went and talked to biochemists. I even talked to some organic chemists and inorganic chemists, even though I had no overlap, really. I really didn't understand what they were doing. But I would just talk to them when there was an opportunity. I'd go up and talk to them, and then try to come up with ways to communicate to them what I was doing and why I found it interesting and why I felt it was a reasonable thing to work on. In chemistry, without explicitly saying that, but just, describing it in terms that I hoped that they would appreciate and understand.
Yeah, thank you. Terry or Evelyn, if you want to add something on that.
In my case, I think, what helped me a lot was to really translate the question, like get the people excited about the question, the biological question, and then you try to talk to the physicist and you make that question interesting for physicists. And there's like, if it's a fundamental question you're addressing, there's going to be a perspective. They're going to get excited about the question, and then the work is to translate it into the right way so that they can understand in their own language. And it's not just physics and biology, but also I'm also in the program of applied math here. And that's another cultural, again, it's closer to physics maybe, but when you go to talk to data science and applied math, they have a they have a different perspective again. And so every time you kind of need to translate it. And the upshot, the nice thing about doing that exercise is that you also learn and get new ideas like that, because you look at your problem or the question you're asking from a different perspective, and that opens new doors and so on. And so my way of convincing people is to get them like excited about the problem, like I'm like fishing them, and then that's how I do it.
Evelyn, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I'm still something I'm working on, but one thing that I find both challenging and exciting is I feel that our work really pushes us to start to ask at a deeper level, well, what does it mean to do science? Because our traditional ways or the usual questions we ask don't really work anymore. Now maybe we have to start from scratch. What does it mean that's the usual classification we have of different types of systems. Is that still valid? Well, biology definitely throws open a lot of those things. What does it mean to, do we do hypothesis driven, or do we do observation driven, or do we need a hypothesis? And a lot of these questions look different in biology and in physics. And so a lot of times revisiting those questions on a fundamental level, I think is very exciting. And I think it's a way to really engage people, physicists and biologists alike, to try to build together a common language. But it is also very challenging because thinking hard about those questions is tough. It takes a lot of energy and effort, and a lot of times we or people don't have the energy or time to put into that, to rethink how we want to do things for this new field. So I think that is really an opportunity and a way to start to build new frameworks for what we're doing, which is necessary, absolutely. But it's also not something for every day. Sometimes we just want to close our door and think about our calculation, and that's also fine. So for me, I'm trying to find that balance is also not very easy. I'm curious to know what other people think about it.
Yeah, I don't know. I always say that the first several years as an assistant professor were the worst years of my life. I mean, I was really miserable. I thought I was miserable as a postdoc. I was really stressed out about getting a job. But in retrospect, once I was an assistant professor, at least I felt I accomplished something every day. And the thing about being an assistant professor is that, people decided that you're good at research, good enough to get a faculty position, and then you're sort of deprived of many opportunities to do research. Right? You just have your time gets chopped up into these small segments. It's really hard to think in a long, sustained way and to do research. You had to do all these things that you weren't trained to do at all. And if you're in a different discipline from the one that you were brought up with, it's even more, I think, overwhelming. So it's very hard. But it does get better. I just want to say that. I think by the time I was sort of in my third, fourth year, I started just getting more used to the job. I was able to what you have to do is just to expect less of yourself every day so that you can still feel good about yourself. And so just, dumb down your expectations for yourself and plug away. And after a while, you just sort of get more used to it, and it gets easier.
Okay, on that high note.
But I mean, one thing that on the same note, when you become assistant professor, in some sense, it's also pretty amazing. You get like a pot of money, and you can just go and do whatever you want with it. And that doesn't happen very often in a job. You don't even have to answer to, I don't know, stock market type of people who want to make money. You can just spend the whole thing on whatever is what you want to think. And so that's like a very, very privileged position to be. And, if it doesn't work after 5 years, you can always go to the industry. So if you take that perspective, you say, look, I just got like $1 million, and then for 5 or 6 years, I can do whatever I want, you know, the only thing you have to do is discover something. If you discover something, you're probably going to get tenure. And so there's this side of it that is really, really awesome. And at the interface between biology and physics, there's an explosion of question of problem right now. And so it's a very, very exciting time to, you know, to become an assistant professor. For me, like, that was stressful, but was super exciting. Now, for me, it's harder because now I'm an old dude, I'm tenured and everything. And so I'm on this committee and this committee and this committee and this committee. And so those really chop time out. And so me having fun with some equation or experiment happens less and less. And that is, you know, I don't like it as much. But the beginning was, yes, stressful. And I also totally agree that you have to go through, there's a learning curve at the beginning that, you know, and when I started, I have to say, you know, you just arrived, there was there's not a lot of mentoring or anything like that, a little bit, but not much. These days, I think departments, at least here, my department has realized that it's really important to, you know, help and mentor well the junior faculty. So when you look for a job, one question you want to really ask is, okay, what structure do you have for mentoring? How do you make sure that whoever you hire as an assistant professor will become tenure, will be successful, etc.? So those are like really, really important things, because there's some department that are fantastic and some department that are terrible at that, and you want to go into the fantastic one. There can be big difference there, and how those big difference will also impact how you navigate this problem of being a physicist in a biology department or person doing biology in a physics department. I think if the department is really serious about mentoring its junior faculty, that's going to be a place where it's also going to be easier probably to make this connection we're talking about.
So 3 things were brought up here that's also part of my questions, and I want you to kind of comment on those specifically, whichever you choose to comment on. So one is how to, you know, plan for tenure and promotion, right? So I think that's many people here as are thinking about that, and are there sort of ways of balancing, you know, as assistant professors, you get into this thing of you have to do research, you have to do teaching, you have to do service, and some of these things, research you know how to do, teaching for most people is the first time they teach. So they kind of need to figure out how to balance between these things, how to prioritize their time and their focus, and that also translates into sort of how to prepare for tenure and promotion. And the other thing that Thierry brought up was the mentorship aspect, and that's very important, especially in interdisciplinary fields, especially if you're in a department that maybe not the most perfect department. Maybe you can seek out mentors from outside. Are the ways that you would recommend, strategies that you would recommend to sort of seek out mentors, how to go about that? Evelyn, maybe you can start any of these 3 questions. So I want to just mention that we are halfway through the time, so maybe we kind of pace up. Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I don't know, maybe I'm a bit naive, but I think what I have been thinking about more recently is not so much worrying about tenure, because I don't know, I remember at some point, like, you know, I said this to Jose, who's my research mentor here, and he said, Evelyn, don't worry about tenure. You're going to be worrying about lots of other things, such as how to, you know, like who to hire for a postdoc. And I thought, you know, you're just saying that because, you know, you've been through it, but it's honestly true. I mean, I find myself, one of the big challenges in this field, I think, is finding people who have the training of both, quantitative and who are interested in biology. And it's questions like this that I find, the day-to-day that I find way more challenging, because tenure, I don't know, again, maybe I'm naive, but I think it is about, showing that you can do research, teaching, and grants. And at some point when you have all three, at least, I see like my colleagues at Rice and a lot, many of the people in my department are getting tenure. So I am less worried about that. And maybe it's because I think I have been also lucky to find good mentors. I am someone who has really also looked for that. So here, Jose, Peter, they've been also very encouraging. I remember there was ones that, and I don't know about you guys, but I get this kind of feedback a lot sometimes. Biologists don't think my work touches on biology enough, or physicists, say whatever they say. And I remember talking to Peter, and he said, you just be yourself, like, don't worry about it. And maybe it's a bit naive, but I also find like this kind of encouragement extremely helpful and extremely affirming. And of course, I am trying to take feedback, especially now in my career stage, and to improve. But I also think that having mentors who are supportive and who understand that, well, it is challenging to be interdisciplinary. And of course, we always try to communicate better and to explain better and to connect with different fields. But I'm not going to get it right all the time. I'm going to maybe pitch my talk at the wrong level, use words that don't mean anything to the community I'm speaking to. That's going to happen, and it's something that I can learn from. So in terms of mentorship, well, I mean, I think it's amazing. Amita, we've definitely talked a lot about career. Terry, we've also talked at some points. Andrea, we definitely see each other in different circles. So even people here, I know that there's people on this call that I do talk to about career. And so this is something that is definitely helpful. And I think tapping into the DBIO community, into the community around, has been something that has been essential for me, I think, to think about some of the challenges that I face. So that's where I am. And I definitely encourage that of everyone, because we do have particular challenges, like what Terry was saying. We have a pile of money, and how do we spend it? How do I find people to hire? How do I know when and how? And I think this is something that, for me at least, and I think for many other junior faculty, I know this is something very challenging to find the right people in your group. So learning how to do that and getting mentored on how to do that has been so key for me.
I just want to follow up on just say I really agree with what you said about not worrying about tenure itself, but really worrying about doing good work, doing exciting work that makes you happy. I mean, when I started out as an assistant professor, I came in and all I knew was that I didn't want to do what I said I was going to do. that I would really like to do something more interesting. And I did actually spend about a year just sort of reading and thinking and trying to decide what I wanted to do. And in the end, I started two things. One of them, each led to a strand of research. One more towards biological physics, through the charged polymers, and the other one eventually to jamming. And so, but they were new. This was not what I said I was going to do. And so I think it's important that, as Terry said, this is an amazing opportunity. And don't waste it by thinking, oh my God, I got to get tenure. I got to get papers out. I'm just going to do something that I don't really care about, because I can do it. I know how to do it. It's not, you shouldn't, maybe you should try to resist that pressure. Just think a little bit longer term, because in the end, tenure comes based on, the work that you do. It's not, did you go out and give 27 talks? It's not, did you publish, X number of papers? It's not about that. It's about, what do people outside think about your work? And inside,
Yep. Terry, do you have something to add to that? You're mute, actually.
Terry, you're muted.
Okay, sorry, my screen was moving. I think I totally agree with not worrying about the tenure, really. And if you're worrying all the time about getting tenure, I think you're probably not doing the right job. Like, you should just, as I was saying, get that money and have a lot of fun with it. Do the stuff that you really makes you happy. And it's a protected time, so you can actually go and tackle question that might be even risky and so on, but worth it. And so in that sense, it is a very special time. And then as far as mentoring, I would recommend to, as soon as you arrive, to talk to everyone in the department, because when the department is a community, and so and if you get tenure, you're going to spend a lot of time in that community, and so you want to know right away, like, who's exciting and who's less exciting, and with who to hang out, etc. No, and then that will immediately start to give you ideas about who to ask to be your mentor, or it's going to come organically. And then the other thing that is very true also is get mentors outside of the department, because the department has also its own politics and stuff like that. And having somebody from the outside, they can give you a perspective on, tell you, oh, don't worry about these things, or pay attention to that and so on. So having somebody from the outside is so very useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just say one thing about that? There was something that came up about balancing research and teaching and service and that sort of thing. And I have a totally bullshit plot that I like to show. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm plotting quality versus effort. And I think it's sigmoidal, basically. And when before I became an assistant professor, I was sort of aiming to be, out above here, around where it maxes out. But what I discovered as an assistant professor was that I should really only aim for the inflection point. That if I really aim for up here, there just isn't enough time in the day. And so if I aim for this in most of the things that I do, and maybe the things that I really love the best and they're more fun, I'll go higher, but really just go for the inflection point. And I applied that to everything. I mean, even with the raising of my kids, they're very happy.
Good. Good to know. Yeah, thanks. That's I think that's a really good advice. So we have 20 more minutes. I think we should probably open the floor for questions from the audience. So if anyone has a question, you can either post in the chat or just speak up. You can wait a few minutes. If there's no question, we can also continue. Okay, maybe as we wait and as people gather their thoughts. Yeah.
Any tips?
Yeah, on hire. So that was the question I was also going to ask. So how you end up in different departments, well, faculty in biological physics, we recruit students from different departments, usually, or postdocs with different background and knowledge. How to hire people, right? How to decide if that's the right fit. I know, Evelyn, you brought this up. Maybe you want to tell us something about your recent endeavors.
So I will say two things. One is advice that I heard and also my own practical experience. So advice that I heard is to be picky. And I absolutely see that because I have a small group. For now, I have one postdoc, one grad student, one undergrad. And so it's pretty small, but at the same time, I really love everyone in my group and they are doing great work. And I feel like I can concentrate on that. And that is right now for me, Andrea brought up kids. I just had a baby. So, it's a sort of a manageable space for me right now. But also the other thing about first hires is that it is what has been helpful for me is to also get my colleagues to give some feedback on people that I want to hire, because I do think that a rookie mistake, and one I see some of my other colleagues making as well, is that we are often, I at least often very optimistic, and I always want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. So I get applicants and I'm very excited and I'm already thinking, okay, they can do all these things in my group. But it is, what I've done is to, maybe invite them to give a talk and then have them talk to also my other colleagues, because sometimes they see things that I don't, and that for me, not having so much experience, I don't see as red flags. So for example, I had a colleague say to me, this applicant sounds good, but they don't want to move from Europe, really. You can hear it sort of as a subtext in their voice, or this person, they seem very enthusiastic, but can they really learn what they say that they want to learn? And starting to think more about how some things that before I'm very optimistic about, and I start to think more carefully about and talk to them more about, I start to realize that it's true. And this helps me also to be more careful in filtering. So getting as much as possible people's feedback on candidates, I think has been very helpful.
Thierry?
Yeah, I think actually the hardest thing in this job, I think, is to line up ideas, money, and hires. So typically you have an idea, but you don't have the money yet. Then you write a grant, you get the money, then you have to find the person. And having the three together is very difficult, because then you're looking for the person, but you're not finding the right person. So for me, actually, this is the hardest thing to do. And then in terms of hiring someone or choosing someone to hire, what I tend to do is always invite them to come here, give a talk. I've done in the past, not like just a talk online and things like that, but I'm not going to do that anymore. And the second thing is when they come, they meet with everyone in the lab, and each person in the lab talk to them about their research and so on. And then after the person has given a talk and spent the whole day here, the whole lab will discuss that candidate together. And I also ask colleagues to come to the talk and give me feedback, etc. And then I also ask outside letters, and then with all of this, eventually kind of make a decision. But it's still very difficult. And I guarantee you, everyone here will make an error. Or if you don't, you're like amazing. You need to tell me how you do it. But you will at some point hire the wrong person, or like a person that is going to be more work for you than help.
Maybe, Andrea, I'll switch the question. I change the question a little bit, but the same question. What are the warning signs that, red flags that you identify when you're interviewing a person? You should never hire that person.
Yeah. So, I've certainly made my share of mistakes. So, I've had really outstanding people as well. I guess warning signs are, well, I found the most reliable warning signs is how they talk to other people in my group. But of course, that only works once you have some people in your group already. So if you're really just starting out, it's rather tough. And I have to say that, at first, I didn't do as well. As time went on, I attracted, people who worked out better. And it was partly the people, and it was partly also how I handled them. because I think what we haven't talked about is it's not only who you hire, but how you handle the person you hire. Because I think we all start out sort of doing perturbation theory around ourselves, like what do we like, and we'll perturb that around a little bit, you know, to say how would this other person respond? But it's not true. I mean, people are so different. You know, once you have kids, you really realize that. But what works for one person doesn't work for another person at all. And so each person sort of needs a different way to handle them and work with them. So I think it's not just looking for people who are excited about what you're doing and yes, wanting to be there, that's important. And you know, not wishing that they were at some other university or something, or working really on high energy theory or something, which has happened to me. Okay. But also how you work with them. And there's their carrots and their sticks, and that particular balance of carrots and sticks, and which carrots and which sticks to use are just totally different from each person. And I think that's sort of the hardest thing to learn in the job.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have another question from Suraj about suggestions and advice for writing the first grants. So we go maybe from Evelyn, who probably is closest to her first grant writing experience, and take it backwards.
Yeah, definitely learning how to write grants is a whole process that I didn't realize how much there are actually a lot of just good practices that work. So I think the first thing for me to do was just to really discover that there's a bunch of good practices. There are people who give talks about how to write grants. My university had a several week-long sort of a camp for the junior faculty to write our career award grants together. So I would look for something in your university that can really help you, because yes, you know, some people are naturally good at writing, but really there's a lot of very tried and true practices that make the grants just more appealing, more understandable. And so just good grantsmanship, I didn't realize how much of it there are, just a bunch of good tips, you know, some general structures and frameworks that you can use to make your grants just much more readable and palatable there. I read a book when I first started. I think it was something like Advice for New Faculty. I'm not sure exactly sure the title, but the author is Robert Boyce, and I loved it. It was really about even just systematically how to set aside time in the day, how to balance, you know, planning classes together with writing. Essentially, one of the ideas was just to do small chunks every day. And that also helps when planning for teaching a class, so that you don't get overwhelmed and suddenly try to, you know, stuff too much information into one lecture or too much information into one paragraph, which is definitely something that kills both lectures and grants. So just breaking this up and learning how to do this in a systematic way, I think was something that I benefited a lot from. And then finding people who can be helpful. Again, this community is helpful. I would say biological physicists are, you know, we have particular challenges. And so finding people who can really give good advice, who can share their tips, who can share their experience. I remember when I wrote my career award, like someone who, perhaps many of you know Herbie Levine, and he says it like it is. You know, he started like, okay, Evelyn, pretty good job, but here are all the things that, you know, are could be improved. And he really said, you know, I didn't understand your part 3 at all. You know, part 1, well, you need to do this. And that was so helpful. Because having someone who really could tell me, you know, what was missing about the grant. So that's another advice. So try to finish it early so that you can get feedback on it. It's not always easy, but setting aside that time to do grants, I think, is really helpful. And so I guess based on that, maybe my last piece of advice would be, instead of just trying to write lots of grants quickly, taking the time to learn the techniques and to write one good grant properly, is at least that was something that worked for me, because there was a lot that I had to learn, and trying to rush it would definitely not have worked, I think. So.
Yeah, Thierry or Andrea, either one. Yeah.
I mean, I would add that, you know, you should ask your colleague to share their grants with you. A lot of colleagues will just send you their career award that was successful, or their NIH grant, or their Sloan grant, or whatever. And once you read like, you know, 5, 6, or 7 of those, you start to realize some grants are much easier to read than others. And then you start to realize why. The other thing is, I would totally serve on the committee that review the grants for NSF, for NIH, and so on. Because there you're going to read and you're going to immediately realize, oh, I hate reading this grant. Why is that? Oh, it's because, you know, the even simple thing like, oh, that person tried to use all of the space to the max. Like there's almost no paragraph. Everything is, you know, it's, for me, for example, that's like I hate it when I have to read something like that. So I learned a lot like that. And then feedback, as Evelyn was saying, I you know, I send my grant to Tom Pollard or somebody like that, who's a senior person here when I was starting. And he gave me fantastic feedback. So that's very useful.
Andrea?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, in reading grant proposals, I think what a lot of people could work on is really simple, clear, compelling communication. And the interesting thing is that many of these people, I've heard them give talks, and they give good talks, but they write a proposal. It's like, there's all just, it's a word salad, you know, just things thrown in to try to make it sexier or something like that. And it's wasted verbiage, you know, just wasted space on that kind of thing. Just really just explain what you're doing and why you're doing it and why it's interesting, and not in that order, why it's interesting first, right? I mean, you really had to, you know, put things in as broad a context as is honest, okay? And then funnel down quite rapidly into what you're actually going to do, and explain it simply and clearly. The thing is, our system, it's hard to get hired if you don't speak reasonably well. So if there's a big difference between what you write and how you would explain it to somebody, then there's a problem, right? What you write should be not so different from how you would explain it to somebody verbally.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be at about that level of detail, not too much.
Yep, thanks a lot. So we are 5 minutes to the end. I don't think there is any more question from the audience. So what I wanted to ask the 3 of you is that if you have any sort of advice that you want to give that we haven't talked about, or any last thoughts on this, that would be great.
Yes, there's a book. It's called Every Other Thursday. It was a bunch of women in the Bay Area, academics, who would get together every other Thursday and meet, and they would talk about well, basically longer term things. We're so focused on putting out fires, on meeting deadlines and doing this and that, that it's hard to have time to think it in more longer term. What can I do to make my life better? To make myself happier in my job? And it's nice to have a group of people where you can do that you can do that with. They don't have to be in the same department. In fact, it's good if they're not in the same department. If you can find a group, and a lot of universities do that now, they try to put, you know, assistant professors with those in other departments. But if you can find a group of congenial people to try to meet and just have that space to think longer term, it's very helpful.
This is a great advice, actually. Evelyn or Thierry, any last thoughts?
Well, firstly, thank you, Andrea, for that book suggestion. I'm definitely going to go look at it. And I'm just going to echo that building and finding community has been something that has been absolutely necessary for me, because I do think that the work we do is both very challenging, but also potentially really big impact. So it's a lot of fun, but that courage to go out there and ask the big questions is something that I can't sustain by myself. And having community to support each other and to listen to each other, because also I liked what Andrea said about we should write the way that we talk, and I believe in that, and I think we should do that more often. But what is helpful there is to have people whom we can listen and talk to each other, so that we actually think about how what we're saying sounds, and that implies a community. And so community is necessary for so many reasons. And you know, I'm so glad for this community, but also for, you know, any way in which we help and support each other.
Yeah, maybe one last thing I would say is that we've talked a lot about mentoring of the junior faculty and so on, but one thing that is very helpful to the junior faculty is if that person gets training in mentoring themselves, their own student, because that's one thing that when you come in as a new faculty, you probably haven't done a lot. Maybe you have, maybe you're not. And it's actually pretty tricky. And as it was said, like everyone is different and respond very differently to the same message. And so you do have to take that into account and build like a lab or a lab that is exciting, where people want to come, that has a good ambience and so on. And that takes attention. And so you can learn about that, how to do that best. And again, most universities now they offer training in that area and so on. And I definitely would recommend to take advantage of those.
With that, I would like to thank the great panelists we had, and for the fantastic conversation. Thanks a lot for your time and for all your wisdom. Thanks to the audience who stayed around, and I think listen to this very sort of keenly. I really enjoyed learning from your experiences personally. Yeah, as Nancy said, we have these events organized every month, so stay tuned, and also check out the website, the Engage website, for previous talks, and also the recording of this one that will show up hopefully soon. Yeah, thanks a lot, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Armita.
Armita.
For organizing.
And good luck to everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.